What happened in Vegas Thursday is pretty special. Welcome to NHL Wraparound Short Shifts for Friday, January 16th, 2026. Vic and Neil heading into a long weekend. Mitch Marner plays his first game against the Toronto Maple Leafs since being traded over the summer. What a night it was.
You know, Mitch Marner was the biggest move made in the offseason, the most anticipated move once the Leafs gave control of the situation over to the player Marner. And he was leaving his hometown of Toronto to go somewhere else. And finally, a deal was consummated with the Vegas Golden Knights, who seem to be the ones that get in on all these big deals. But anyway, Marner left his hometown, went to Vegas, and was much anticipated as to how he would do outside of Toronto. So, of course, the biggest game that was anticipated, or the biggest two games, would be when Marner and his new team, the Vegas Golden Knights, played the Toronto Maple Leafs. And last night's game didn't let anybody down in excitement.
We could probably do a whole show on this game alone. And after playing 588 games together with Auston Matthews, they were opponents, at least in terms of club teams, for the very first time. They, of course, played against each other in the Four Nations tournament. But on Thursday, it's a 6-5 overtime win for the Golden Knights, coming back from a 5-3 deficit in the third period. Marner had 2 assists. Tomas Hertl, the game-tying goal with 7 seconds left. And this came after Pavel Dorofeyev had an apparent hat trick that was waved off by an offside. But on the tying goal, Matthew Knies broke his stick of a shot by Jack Eichel. And essentially, it was a 6-on-4. Toronto almost got this thing to the finish line last night, but not quite. And then Eichel gets the overtime winner from Mark Stone, who had 3 more points. Stone has points in 27 out of the 30 games that he has played this season.
Well, Vic, Mark Stone's been an amazing player, really, when you think about it. His whole career, I mean, yes, he does get hurt quite often for Vegas, but he is instrumental on that team. And in fact, the Vegas Golden Knights are not the same team when Stone is not playing. He is that important to that team. He's not only the captain, but he's also a catalyst on that team. And they play a lot different, as I said, when he's playing and when he's not playing. He's definitely the lead dog on that team.
Some other storylines in that one. Adin Hill played in goal for the Golden Knights. It was his first game since October 20th. Needless to say, not stellar, giving up 5 goals, but he does get the win. But more significantly, is a player that went out again for the Maple Leafs, William Nylander. Was injured after scoring the goal that made it 2-0. And if you take a look at this play, he's fine after he scores the goal. Then he comes up along the far boards and kind of takes a little bit of a stumble. And he never played after that. This was just his 4th game back after missing 6 games previous. So for Nylander, you've got to wonder whether or not this is going to be some sort of lingering thing that goes on throughout the balance of the season.
And it's got to be a leg thing. It's got to be a knee, an ankle, that kind of thing, where he, as you said, he stumbled and then, couldn't play anymore. I'm sure they're not racing him back too early or trying to push him to get back into the lineup too early. They've probably got great doctors looking after him. So we'll have to see how long William Nylander is out. But like I just said with Mark Stone, aren't they a different team when Nylander plays and when he doesn't play? I mean, he's such a great player and so good offensively. Toronto would really miss him if he's out again.
And another side note coming out of that Vegas-Toronto game on Thursday, Mitch Marner took the opening faceoff against the player that he was traded for, Nick Waugh, and of course Waugh making his return to Vegas for the first time. He had won a cup with the Golden Knights in 2023. So this one is in the books, Neil. They will now meet next Friday in Toronto. And somewhat interesting in terms of the scheduling, because the Golden Knights played on Wednesday, winning in overtime in Los Angeles, and then they just come back and they play their first of the 2 games against the Leafs. And then Vegas will play in Boston next Thursday before flying into Toronto to play next Friday. So this isn't even a Hockey Night in Canada game. So a little bit of peculiar scheduling there, in that you're not going to have the full-blown media hype that you would have maybe with a day off and the game being played on a Saturday in front of a national audience.
Just the way the schedule works out, I guess. With the compressed schedule for the Olympics, I guess they just got to cram these games in, and they can't put too much thought into, Hockey Night in Canada and all the rest of the things that they might think about during the normal regular season.
I would have thought that one was a layup, but I was reading TSN yesterday online, and they always put out these questions of certain players, certain teams, and whatnot, and they were making mention about Marner being one of the most polarizing players in Maple Leafs history. From my seat, I didn't think he was ever terribly controversial. So is the reference of being polarizing fan contrived or media contrived? Because I don't think it was Marner contrived.
It's just more typical media calling him polarizing. What happened with Marner was polarizing, I think. How Toronto let it slip away. They didn't trade him. They didn't re-sign him. And then he had all the cards. And his cards that he played were, you're going to trade me where I want to go, or I'm going to go there, and you'll get nothing. So, a Nick Waugh for Mitch Marner is not a good trade for Toronto. Obviously. But they had gotten themselves into that situation. And we all know that there's reasons for it. They went through a GM change and different things. But I think that the interesting part of this is going to be how the Toronto crowd reacts to Marner, because this is not a New York Islanders crowd reacting to Tavares where he's booed every time he touches a puck. It might be like that in Toronto, but we don't know. Will they boo him every time he touches a puck? He is from Toronto. He's one of their own. Or will they give him a standing ovation when they do a video tribute on the video board for him, which I'm sure they've got planned?
Absolutely. And look, he's not the first player to return to an old team. So, yes, it's going to be a huge event. But once it's done, and it's going to be in the rearview mirror like every other player in NHL history that has left the club and come back to play in the arena that he used to perform in.
It won't be, again, I'll go back to the Islander thing. How many years has Tavares been in Toronto now? And yet, just this month, as soon as he touched the puck at UBS Arena, the booing started. And it's almost a sport there to boo John Tavares. So I don't think that'll happen in Toronto, knowing Toronto the way I do. And I think it'll be that they'll have fun with it that first night, but I don't think it'll go on year after year after year.
Enough said on Marner, and we'll certainly have more on that coming up next week when he returns to Scotiabank Arena. Big honor on Thursday for Zdeno Chara, his number 33 up to the rafters in TD Garden. It's the 13th number retired by the team. Chara's 7th all-time with 1,680 games played, 24 seasons with the Islanders, Ottawa, Boston, and Washington. And the Bruins celebrate him by sweeping their 5-game homestand 4-2 over Seattle. Bruins have won 7 out of 8 using a real balanced offense and solid goaltending. But let's go back to Chara for a second, because, when you go through the history of the NHL and tough guys, and you could go all the way back to Eddie Shore almost 100 years ago, and Red Horner and Gordie Howe, and you can name any enforcer, any player. I think there were a few players in the history of the league that people wanted to engage in when he was angry than Zdeno Chara.
Well, first of all, he was like a monster out there because he's so tall and so big. And I remember Zdeno Chara from when he was a rookie with the Islanders. and we played rookie games against him, the Rangers and the Islanders, and he was a giraffe. I mean, he was, sort of rimpy-ish at that point.
Yeah.
And Darren Langdon actually fought him in a game, had to reach way up to try to punch at him. And Darren Langdon was a rabbit puncher. But when you think about, here's Zdeno Chara, number being retired by the Bruins, the last Bruins captain to hoist the Stanley Cup. Isn't it sad that the Islanders gave him away to Ottawa, and then Ottawa made a decision between signing Redden and signing Chara, and Peter Chiarelli, who had just left the Ottawa Senators to go to the Bruins, signs Zdeno Chara to come to Boston on what was at the time a huge contract. And he ends up being, Boston folklore. But two other teams, the Ottawa Senators and the New York Islanders, and especially the Islanders, because they drafted him, it could have been his number being retired there, but no, these things happen.
Remember when he came up and there was that Hockey News cover of him going back-to-back with Ziggy Palffy?
Yeah.
And it was like a 2-foot difference. So it was something to see Chara back then. And of course now, and now he's still running marathons and just a big part of the Boston community. But I think what a lot of people don't remember is he's one of the few players that actually prompted a change in the NHL. And you remember back in 2011, when the glass by the benches was basically an L-shaped edge. And he ran Max Pacioretty into that, and I thought he almost killed Pacioretty that night. The following year, 2011-2012, the NHL instituted the rounded glass by the benches that we see today.
Well, there's one other rule that comes to mind that Zdeno Chara changed, and that was the length of the hockey stick. Before Chara, there was a length of a hockey stick. You couldn't have it longer than X amount of inches. Chara came into the league, and the league decided that they had to allow you to have a longer stick because he was so big, and the players in the future would be bigger and bigger and bigger. So they changed that rule. But that all started with Chara.
Yeah. And I think that Matt Zuccarello uses his stick the size that Chara would have, despite being one of the smaller players in the league, right?
Yeah, and it's amazing that he can do that because I know when I played, I had a short stick, and I felt like I couldn't stick handle if that puck was way out in front of me, and yet Zuccarello does it. And, players, not to go too far on this, but players all play with a different handle on their stick, a different knob on their stick. Adam Oates used to cut the blade of the stick down to looking like an oversized golf club. And yet he won face-off after face-off with that and was a magician with setting up Brett Hull when they were together in St. Louis and on in his career. So it's different strokes for different folks when it comes to sticks.
You remember that play with Pacioretty in 2011, but I think it's only fair to say that there was actually a backstory to that. And that is exactly 2 months earlier, on January 8th, 2011, Pacioretty scored against the Bruins in overtime. And if you look at the celebration, Pacioretty comes up behind Chara and chirps something and then gives him a little bit of a shove. And there was quite a scrum that ensued after that game. So for Chara, this was somewhat of a retribution here of running him into the boards the way he did. I don't think he meant to end the way it did. It just so happened that it was in a bad part of the ice, but still, there was a backstory to that.
Did it just happen to be that Chara, took Pacioretty into the boards like he would have taken anybody else into the boards? That's his job. He's a defenseman, and he's got to cut the guy off.
There was another honor on Thursday where the Sabres recognized their 2005-2006 team, which made it to the East Final against Carolina before losing in 7 games. And they come out as a winner also. Tage Thompson, 3 goals, 2 assists, 5 points. The Sabres are 15-0-2 in their last 17 games. They remain in wild card one, and Thompson almost had a 6-point because he took a shot for his 4th goal at the empty net. It was stopped by Lane Hudson. But in terms of the Sabres, Neil, they're on this absolutely phenomenal streak. We all know that they've gone 14 years in a row without making the postseason. They're still barely in the playoffs. And at some point, this is going to soften up a little bit for them. They're not going to go on a run like this for the entire rest of the season. So as much energy and as much success as they've had, they're barely in a playoff spot as of Friday.
Right, but if they can just go 500 for the rest of the season, real 500, not NHL 500. If win one, lose one, win one, lose one, they'll make it into the playoffs. But I want to comment on something else. I mean, how pitiful is your history as a franchise if your celebration is the 20-year anniversary of a team that didn't win anything? They got knocked out in 7 games by Carolina. So what? So what are you honoring? That they won a round or two? Like, it's so strange that you would honor a team that didn't win.
I put that one up on a tee for you, and you certainly took your swing. By the way, if the Sabres go 500 for the rest of the year, they will finish with 92 points, and that will keep them right in the bubble. So still a lot of work ahead for Buffalo. A couple of teams that are getting some wake-up calls. How about the Winnipeg Jets? Now winners of 4 straight, a 6-2 win over Minnesota on Thursday. Ever since Jonathan Toews was moved to the first power play unit prior to the game against the Edmonton Oilers on January 8th, that was the last game of the 11-game winless skid. This team has taken off. Toews has scored in 4 straight games, got his 900th career point. And for the Jets, you can see that so many of the things that weren't going right for them are starting to turn. They had a 3-0 lead after the first period. They scored 2 goals in the last 11 seconds of that period. But remember that Connor McDavid, outstanding at the start of this game because the Wild got the first 10 shots on goal.
Yeah, and Winnipeg then woke up, but Connor McDavid seems to be back to playing the way that only he can play. And that's good news, certainly for the Winnipeg Jets, and is going to serve them well because he is the main cog in that team. But they seem to have all woken up. And you know what? Good on Kevin Cheveldayoff. As we talked about, he signed Jonathan Toews. Jonathan Toews is nothing but a winner. Yes, he's missed a couple of seasons, so you might question whether he can come back. But I'll guarantee he's been great for that locker room, and especially through a tough skid that they've been on.
You could see the confidence starting to grow with this club, and they are going to continue to battle through the injury bug, though, because Neil Pionk, Colin Miller, Hayden Fleury, all defensemen, all out week to week. But we've also seen how some teams have thrived. Just look no further than the Tampa Bay Lightning, that they have played without Victor Hedman and Ryan McDonough and Eric Chernak for a spell. So it's not impossible, but the reality is the Jets still have a lot of work to do. They are still 9th in the Western wild card, 8 points out of wild card 2 heading into the weekend.
No, they definitely have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a tough grind for them to get in. If you look at Money Puck, they don't have them making the playoffs. And if any predictor of this stuff, then Money Puck happens to come to mind. Whether you like them or not, it doesn't really matter. But they do not have the Jets having a very good shot at making the playoffs this year.
Another team that's going to continue to battle, the Columbus Blue Jackets, now 2-0 under Rick Bowness. They beat Vancouver 4-1 on Thursday. And much like the game against Calgary a couple of nights earlier, I was interested to see how they would play this third period with a lead. They went in with a 3-1 advantage, and they actually extended the lead to make it 4-1. I think this was the perfect opponent to try to hold the lead and really button down your third period. Vancouver tied for the second fewest goals scored in the NHL. And Elvis Merzlikins, 30 saves, his first win since December 4th. So Bowness, at least in the short term, starting to get this team back on the rails.
And what's too bad for the Winnipeg Jet fans and for Rick Bowness and the organization is that Columbus has already been to Winnipeg. They were there on November 18th and lost 5-2 to the Jets. So Rick Bowness doesn't get to go to Winnipeg this season and see his fans and get the applause that he deserves for his time in Winnipeg. We'll see if he decides to stay coaching next season and if that's when he gets to go back and visit his old temporary home.
Blue Jackets enter the weekend wild card 9 in the East, 7 points out of wild card 2. So really the Blue Jackets and the Jets in very similar spots. Some other notes. Connor McDavid's 20-game point streak ended on Thursday in a 1-0 loss to the New York Islanders. This game was scoreless deep into the third period. Leon Draisaitl takes an offensive zone penalty. Anthony Duclair scores with 6:18 left. And then Draisaitl had a golden opportunity with 35 seconds left in regulation to tie the game. He took a pass from McDavid, had a shot at a seemingly open net, but the puck hit Ilya Sorokin's glove, then glanced off the post, and that was that for the 20-game point streak for McDavid. And Sorokin, literally a one-man show in this game, 35 saves, league best 5th shutout of the season for an Islander team that continues to believe in itself.
And Sorokin is the reason why the Islanders are probably going to be in the playoffs this year. I see no reason why they're not up to this point. Sorokin has been outstanding like he was 3 years ago. Just tremendous like he was when he was being coached by Lane Lambert and before that with Barry Trotz. So he's one of the main reasons. The other reasons we should mention, they probably got the Rookie of the Year playing on defense there, Matthew Schaefer, who's injected a lot of life into that team and that organization. So, the Islanders are for real. I mean, it's really hard to believe that the Edmonton Oilers couldn't get a goal on the New York Islanders at home with McDavid and Draisaitl and Bonehead Bouchard and the rest of them.
Do you just like saying that about Bouchard?
I do.
The Isles come into the weekend second in the Metro, 57 points, only 3 back of the Carolina Hurricanes. More goaltending heroics, and this one taking place in the Western Conference. Karel Vejmelka, 26 saves, in Utah's 2-1 win over Dallas. Vejmelka now has 5 straight wins. He struggled early on in the season. He's only given up 7 goals in those 5 games. The Mammoth move into wild card 1, and I'm just telling you, I got Bill Armstrong's number on speed dial when we do a live show there if the Mammoth make the playoffs.
Billy said he'd like us to be out there, and that'd be fun to go out to Salt Lake City and do a show from a Mammoth game.
More goaltending. What about Devin Cooley? 22 saves in a 3-1 win over Chicago. Cooley is not classified as an NHL rookie, even though he only had played 6 games with San Jose before moving on to the Flames. He is 3rd in the NHL in both goals against average at 2.20 and save percentage, .921. He signed a 2-year extension with the Flames on December 30th. 2 years, $2.7 million in total. This was a guy, Neil, that I think when Dan Vladar went to Philadelphia and Cooley was going to be the backup to Dustin Wolf, and we looked at those 6 games in total of NHL experience, we were like, whoa, this is going to be way too much for Wolf to shoulder this load by himself. But Cooley has done a very creditable job for them.
He's done a great job, and I'll go one step further. What we really said was, what is Calgary doing? They didn't sign a backup goalie to Wolf.
Yeah.
They're just going to use Devin Cooley. And this is at a time when a lot of NHL teams are signing a 3rd NHL goalie.
Yeah.
Calgary doesn't even have a 2nd. And Devin Cooley has made us look like the jackasses that we are.
Wow.
No, but he's made believers out of a lot of people, including us.
It's a one-way deal. So now Cooley and Wolf locked in as the 1 and 2 in Calgary for at least this season and to beyond that. Other side of the coin, Philadelphia Flyers slumping. They are now the 5th wild card in the East. They're 0-4-1 in their last 5, losing 6-3 in Pittsburgh. And tell me if you've heard this before. The power play last in the NHL at 15%. And I think a lot of that feel good that we saw for the Flyers under Rick Tocchet early in the season starting to slip away. I mean, they're not out of this thing by any stretch, but it certainly doesn't look like the same team that we had seen 2 and 3 weeks ago.
No, it certainly doesn't. And the other thing is we talked a lot about John Tortorella and his power play never being any good. And, he doesn't have a good power play and blah, blah. Well, was it John Tortorella or was it the players? Because they're back there again, and now they have Rick Tocchet as their coach.
They do have Jamie Drysdale back in their lineup from injury, so perhaps this is something that turns around, and they've got a perfect opponent coming in on Saturday afternoon with the struggling New York Rangers. One other note that I want to point out, and one of the games that you were a little wobbly-kneed on making your sPix on Thursday, and that was the San Jose-Washington game. And for good reason, because the Sharks go into D.C., and they beat the Capitals 3-2. Pavel Regenda, who's a player that I don't think a lot of people have heard of, but another one of these young players, in addition to Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith, who is expected to play Friday at Detroit, coming back into the lineup. Regenda has 7 goals in 9 games, including a hat trick January 3rd against Tampa Bay. So you can see that the Sharks continue to have this resourcefulness, this youthful exuberance. They're getting contributions from a lot of different places, and they come into the weekend second in the wild card in the West. So the longer this goes on for them, the more belief this team is going to have as we get to the last 2.5 months of the season.
They're turning heads in the league, that's for sure. When you see their game coming up at night, you can't predict a certain win for the other team as you could for the last 5 years or so. The Sharks are a different club. They're dynamic now, and they're getting goaltending, and they can win on any night.
We texted back and forth, and one of the things that really stood out was that the Sharks were outshooting the Caps 23-9 through 2 periods. And then, of course, the expected rush by Washington in the 3rd period. Ryan Leonard got a goal to get it to 3-2. They outshot the Sharks 14-3 in the 3rd period, but still San Jose able to hang on.
Yeah, and the other thing is, don't forget, Vic, I mean, we got to mention this over and over again. This game was in Washington. This was not in San Jose, and they were just pummeling the Caps with shots up until the 3rd period when the Caps went into the locker room, drank some coffee, and came back out. So, yeah, give them full marks. That the Sharks went into Washington and took a bite out of the Caps.
Oh, good line. Alex Nedeljkovic in goal for San Jose in that one. And just a note for the Washington Capitals, they got Jacob Chikrin back on their back line. He had missed the last 2 games with an illness. Some other notes. Robert Thomas, the St. Louis Blues on IR and will be reevaluated in 2 weeks with a lower body injury. He was hurt on Tuesday in the shutout win for the Blues over Carolina. Jonas Brodin, Minnesota Wild, week to week with a lower body injury. His status with the Swedish club in the Olympics now in question. Joel Eriksson Ek, also with the Minnesota Wild, has missed the last 3 games with a lower body injury, but will accompany the team on their 3-game road trip to Buffalo, Toronto, and Montreal. And Dan Vladar, who we had mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, undisclosed injury suffered in Buffalo on Wednesday, obviously did not play in Pittsburgh Thursday. This is not expected to be a long-term injury. And on the return front, Brandon Montour, the Seattle Kraken, returned in the Kraken's loss in Boston on Thursday. He had missed 14 games with a hand injury suffered on December the 16th. Miro Heiskanen is expected to return Sunday against Tampa Bay. He has missed the last 2 games. On the contract front, Alexander Texier, Montreal Canadiens, signs a 2-year, $5 million extension with the Canadiens. And this is a player that is just a week removed from his first ever 3-point game and his first career hat trick. And he has given some great supplemental offense to the Canadiens since coming over from St. Louis after he was let go by the Blues.
And last night, actually, in the game that they played against Buffalo, he thought, and about 10,000 other people thought, that he'd scored a goal. It was the most peculiar thing you've ever seen. It hit the crossbar, came straight down, hit the goal line. If it had bounced towards the boards, he scores, but it bounced into the crease and out of the net. And we had to play that thing. I had to watch that on TV a couple of times to understand why that wasn't in the net.
Bottom line is he continues to generate chances, and that's only good news for the Montreal Canadiens. So coming up this weekend, games that I'm looking at on Friday. Let me know if anything stands out for you. Florida, Carolina, Nashville at Colorado, and in that one, the Avs bring their 19-0-3 home record into that contest. And a home and home between the Ducks and the Kings. And these teams will play in Anaheim on Saturday. Neither of these teams in the playoffs right now. Kings, wild card 3, Ducks, wild card 5, heading into this weekend.
I'm going to be interested to see also the Sharks at Detroit, being that the Sharks played on Thursday night. How real is Detroit? I think they're for real. No Brad Marchand for the Florida Panthers when they go into to play the Hurricanes. So that's going to be a big disadvantage. And they still don't have Barkov or Kachuk, obviously. And then from there in, I mean, it is peculiar. You were mentioning about Anaheim and LA. I think if we were asked before the season, we would have said that both those teams were going to make the playoffs. We thought that the Kings would make it like they have pretty much for the last how many years, and the Ducks would improve enough to get into the playoffs this year. And right now, it doesn't look like that, but I have a lot of faith in Joel Kenville and his coaching that he could pull the Ducks in there. I'm not sure if the Kings can do it.
The Ducks did end their slide on Tuesday against the Dallas Stars, and now we'll see if they can string a little winning streak together and get back into playoff position. On Saturday, Minnesota at Buffalo. We've already documented the Sabres, 15 wins out of their last 17. Minnesota sliding a little bit. Well, of course Minnesota's sliding because we had Bill Guerin on last week, and you know what happens anytime somebody appears with us is that they go in the opposite direction.
Yeah, poor Bill. We should have told him that before he came on.
Seattle is at Utah, 2 teams that are going to be right there at the end, sitting on that bubble. As we said, Utah in wild card 1, and the Seattle Kraken, 3rd in the Pacific, 5-3 in their last 10 games. And also Montreal at Ottawa, and the Senators playing a little bit better. There's been a lot going on in that organization, and those were the 2 wild card clubs a year ago, and they're going to be battling it right out till the end again this year.
A game that I want to see, too, is the Carolina Hurricanes go into New Jersey after playing at home on Friday. Devils are not quite in the spot that the Rangers are in, but they're surely not in the spot the Islanders are in. Nobody is happy in New Jersey right now. They're underachieving. There's a lot of turmoil going on there. So every game is important to the Devils to get this ship righted.
And even though Dougie Hamilton back in the lineup, it's still being talked about that he's going to be on the move. So that's another thing that even though players say they're going to tune it out and we just have to go out and play, it's there.
Yeah, and a veteran guy who's been very important to that team over the last few years.
On Sunday, only 3 games, Tampa Bay at Dallas, Ottawa at Detroit, and St. Louis at Edmonton, where Ryan Nugent Hopkins will play his 1,000th career game. He was the first overall pick in 2011. Not a Hall of Fame career by any stretch, but he's become an extremely solid player for the Oilers for now 15 years.
I think he's only the third Oiler to play his 1,000th game in an Oilers uniform. I think Kevin Lowe was one of them. I'm not sure who the other player was, but Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, his entire career has been in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been many guys that have done it. Even Kevin Lowe, 6-time Stanley Cup winner, had a stint in New York and then went back to Edmonton.
That'll wrap up our show for today. If you are listening to us on Apple or Spotify or any of the platforms that are out there, please write us a review if you are able to do so. If you check us out on YouTube, please subscribe. And we are also available on ray8.tv. That's RAY, letter D, number 8.tv. Our traffic for next week will be short shifts on Monday, short shifts on Wednesday. I'm going to pull a solo on that one, and wraparound next Friday. But, as we start to approach the Olympic break, our schedule is going to change a little bit. We'll have some specialty shows in there. And one of the ones we're looking to do is a New York-centric show. And Patrick Hoffman has been writing on our website all season long for us. But we're going to do a show, and we're going to field questions from anybody that's listening out there concerning the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils. Send them to us. We will answer them, and that will be the basis of that show. So I'm really looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. And make sure you get to your computer or get on your phone, write out a question for us on those three teams. We'll do the best we can to answer it. It's frustrating right now in two of those three teams. And if you'd ever said at the beginning of the season, okay, tell me the two teams that'll be the most frustrated out of these three, you wouldn't have said the Devils and the Rangers, I don't think, and that the Islanders are happy. You would have said probably the Islanders wouldn't be too happy, and you would have picked one of the other two teams. So it's different in the metro area right now, and I'm looking forward to dissecting it.
Send your questions to Neil at NHLWraparound.com or myself, Vic, at NHLWraparound.com. Take care. Have a great weekend. We'll speak with you again. Short shifts on Monday.